Pulsechain, a new layer 1 blockchain being developed by Hex founder Richard Hart, is doomed to fail. Some of you may have seen my recent controversial video on Richard Hart's last project, Hex.com. In it, I concluded that Hex doesn't have any value proposition to speak of, other than pure speculation. But unlike Hex, Pulsechain actually does have a few things going for it. It'll be a layer 1 blockchain that is faster than Ethereum and has deflationary economics. Not to mention, it has the entire Hex community behind it and has raised over $1 billion for development. But it's still going to fail. There have been a series of decisions made that are detrimental to Pulsechain and will most likely cause everyone who's invested or sacrificed their crypto to lose their money. In this video, I'm going to give 3 reasons explaining why the decisions made were so bad and why outside factors combined with these decisions will lead to the downfall of Pulsechain. Because I know that there are Pulsechain supporters watching this video, at the end, I'm going to go through some of the strongest counter-arguments as to why Pulsechain might succeed. If you like hearing multiple points of view on crypto, even if they don't always align with yours, hit that subscribe button. Reason number 1 why I believe that Pulsechain will fail is their plan to fork Ethereum's state. Basically, instead of starting a new chain from scratch, they're planning to copy and paste the entire state of Ethereum into their new chain. This means that every single smart contract, token, and NFT will have a Pulsechain version of it. The main stated reason why they're doing this is because, as Richard Hart puts it, it's free money. The idea is that all of these duplicate tokens, while they might not have the exact same value as their Ethereum originals, will have some value on Pulsechain. But there's actually a very specific reason why this won't be the case and why the value of all of these Pulsechain versions will quickly approach 0. The most obvious types of tokens that will be worthless on Pulsechain are those like USDC and Tether. The only purpose of these tokens is their ability to be exchanged by those companies, Circle and Tether, for US dollars. Because Circle and Tether won't be recognizing or allowing the exchange with these Pulsechain versions of these tokens, they're useless. Okay, so that part is pretty obvious, and I think even the most hardcore Pulsechain supporters would agree with that. But here's the real issue. Across Ethereum, there are billions of dollars worth of tokens in liquidity pools that are tied to either USDC or Tether. Because these liquidity pools will exist in their current state exactly as they are once Pulsechain is launched, people will be able to use worthless USDC or USDT in order to drain those potentially valuable tokens from the pools, which in turn would cause these tokens to lose all of their value as well. Here is just one example. Currently in Uniswap, there's a liquidity pool of USDC and ETH with around 150 million USDC and around 115,000 ETH. Once Pulsechain launches and the value of USDC is 0, users will be able to buy USDC for nothing on the open market and then use that to drain all of the ETH from the pool. Because this costs nothing to do, this effectively makes the Pulsechain ETH worthless. So that is just one specific problem with the plan to fork Ethereum. Realistically, on launch, Pulsechain will be a complete graveyard of unmaintained applications and worthless tokens. The decision to start off this new chain as a fork of Ethereum really is bewildering to me. Basically, every single application on Ethereum will have a choice, whether they legitimately recognize Pulsechain as a chain that they're maintaining their applications on or not. And because of Pulsechain's bad reputation in the developer community, almost all of these protocols have signaled that they won't be maintaining their Pulsechain versions. This immediately delegitimizes the entire chain. Had Pulsechain actually started a new chain from scratch, they would have the opportunity to legitimize themselves as being the layer 1 chain for members of the Hex and Pulsechain communities. The second reason why Pulsechain will fail is its valuation. Pulsechain, combined with its flagship exchange, PulseX, raised over $1 billion from users, which is crazy on its face. There is a heuristic in startup investing called Jason's Law, which states that if you invest in a company at over $1 billion valuation without a launched product, you will lose all your money. And it might turn out to be a fraud. While I am not necessarily saying that Pulsechain is a fraud or that you will lose all of your money, it is true that the valuation received in its sacrifice phase will cause huge problems going forward, as it tries to live up to that valuation while maintaining the goodwill of its community. The Pulsechain sacrifice, which was basically an old-fashioned ICO wrapped up in obscure language to avoid scrutiny from the SEC, took place smack dab in the middle of a crypto bull market. Since then, the valuation of all crypto has fallen, and some of the smaller and more speculative coins have fallen as much as 90%. This new environment of lower crypto valuations makes it likely that on launch, Pulsechain will have everyone underwater on their original investment. Just to give you an idea, Phantom, which was another layer 1 blockchain that had a reasonable amount of applications and developers on it, went from an $8 billion valuation at the time of the Pulsechain sacrifice to a less than $800 million valuation today. If Pulsechain launched today, I would expect it to launch at a valuation around 1/10 what it was during the sacrifice phase, which would leave a lot of investors disappointed. What's more is that I've seen that some Pulsechain supporters think that their investment could go up 100x, 1000x, or even 10,000x. But starting from Pulsechain's already high valuation, this is almost impossible. Hex's big returns happened early on when it had a tiny market cap. Many fans of Hex were excited about Pulsechain because it allowed them to get on the ground floor of a new project and theoretically made those crazy returns possible. But what they need to understand is this isn't actually the ground floor in the same sense that Hex was. Pulsechain is starting with a very high valuation and bringing with it all of the hype that Hex had at its peak. The only way that the Pulse token could have these insane gains like some people are talking about is if they replace Ethereum as the dominant blockchain. But with Ethereum's planned upgrades like transitioning to proof of stake and sharding, there's really no reason to use Pulse over Ethereum. And that's not even including the fact that the vast majority of crypto developers don't like Richard Heart and view Hex and Pulsechain as a fraud of a project. Even Richard Heart, the founder of Pulsechain, has said that he doesn't view it as a competitor to Ethereum, but rather a complement, which would make these crazy gains in valuation even harder to achieve. The final reason why I believe that Pulsechain is dead on arrival is its competition. One of the main stated purposes for Pulsechain in the first place is the improvements that it's making on Ethereum. Mainly that it is switching to a proof of stake model, will have higher transaction throughput, and lower fees for transactions. The thing is, Ethereum already has a better version of this in the form of layer 2 networks. Layer 2 networks built on top of Ethereum, like Arbitrum and Optimism, are kind of like Pulsechain in the sense that they have faster and cheaper transactions. But in addition to that, they have a lot of advantages. For one, they don't have any of the problems that we've talked about associated with hard forking Ethereum. All of these layer 2 networks have started from scratch, and over time, they've built up a thriving community of developers, users, and applications. These layer 2 networks have been able to do this because they've had a huge head start on Pulsechain. And the unique thing about these is that as they get more users, transactions actually get cheaper on these networks. This is because of the way that layer 2 transactions work, through rollups. As more and more users are using the network, more and more transactions can be batched into each rollup, which makes each individual transaction cheaper. Pulsechain, on the other hand, has the opposite, where the more transactions they have to process, the more expensive these individual transactions will be. The result is that these layer 2 networks have a huge advantage in their network effects. Meanwhile, Pulsechain will actually get slower as it gains popularity. The second thing about these layer 2s is that they've already been accepted as legitimate by the blockchain developer community. They have the entire Ethereum community behind them, which is much bigger than Hex and Pulsechain's communities. They've raised money from some of the most legitimate crypto investors in the industry. And they've already created partnerships with companies like Coinbase and Reddit. In the case of Optimism, they've already had their token listed on almost every single legitimate exchange. And it's likely that Arbitrum will have the same thing happen once they launch their token. This is something that's very unlikely for Pulsechain, given that even Hex hasn't been able to get itself listed on major exchanges. One more advantage that these layer 2s have is that their bridge from Ethereum is much more secure due to how their rollup technology works. The Pulsechain bridge, on the other hand, will depend on some of the same types of insecure technology that has caused so many bridge hacks to date. So imagine that you're a user, a builder, or an investor, and you see Pulsechain on one hand and these layer 2s on Ethereum on the other hand. There is almost no reason why you would choose to build on Pulsechain over these layer 2s. In fact, I challenge you to give me a reason why anybody would use Pulsechain over one of these layer 2s in a comment, and I'll do my best to respond. Speaking of reasons to use Pulsechain, Pulsechain has a huge amount of hype from its supporters. So let's go through some of their claims on why they think that Pulsechain will be very successful. One of the first claims that I found is that because Pulsechain will have 10,000 times more tokens than Ethereum, people will be more likely to invest in it and buy it. It's worth noting that the price of a token alone is really meaningless, and when you buy something, you really have to look at the price combined with the supply. That said, I actually do agree with this claim that people like things that are cheap relatively, and meme coins like Shiba Inu and Dogecoin have proven that. But don't forget, there's still competition. Optimism's token trades at around $1 right now, which is very reasonable from a psychological standpoint. So again, I don't get why anyone would choose a much less legitimate project just because they're looking for a cheap coin. One of the next reasons is Pulsechain's deflationary tokenomics. They're planning on burning 25% of all transaction fees in the Pulse token. By steadily decreasing the supply, this in turn should boost the value for Pulse holders. Here, I actually do agree that this could be good for the value of the Pulse token. But there's one very important person that actually doesn't agree that deflation is good and thinks that inflationary coins are the best coins out there.
People say inflation's bad. Oh yeah, inflation's bad? Explain to me why the best performance that Bitcoin ever had when it was inflating at 100% a year when it first launched. Oh, maybe inflation isn't bad.
You can't say that inflation is good when you have a high inflation coin like Hex, and then turn around and say it's good to have a deflationary coin when you have one like Pulsechain. So moving on, one of the absolute strongest arguments I've seen for Pulsechain is its large and enthusiastic community. The thing is, the core of Hex's community was built on the upswing in price. Because all of the Pulsechain sacrificers will most likely be underwater on their investment at launch, they won't be able to generate the same buzz that Hex did. Speaking of Hex, which Hex tokens are legitimate? The ones on Ethereum or the new copied ones on Pulsechain? Because the community is shared and the network is creating direct copies of these Hex tokens, there will be some debate over what value these new Pulse Hex tokens will actually have. The thing is, any value given to these Pulse Hex tokens will likely have an equal and opposite devaluing of the Ethereum Hex tokens. So this debate, along with a large percentage of people losing money, has the potential to cause division and fracture the strength of the community. I'm sure this won't be the last video I make on Pulsechain, but I would be very surprised if the original sacrificers managed to make that money back, much less go 100x.